From the 1960s onwards, Linda Williams argues in When the Woman Looks that horror cinema relies on perverse structures of seeing. This means that women on screen are positioned as not only or just a victim, but also as monsters. She argues that the monster should be interpreted as the feared power and potency of a different kind of sexuality, the monster as double for the women. I will apply, while critically assessing, Williams' work to Peeping Tom, Michael Powell, 1960, and Jennifer's Body, Karen Kusama, 2009. I will argue that both films reject and challenge the perverse structures of seeing to some extent. This essay will also argue that both films present the true monster as how women are exploited and abused by men. Linda Williams argues in When the Woman Looks that the key difference between the classic horror film and the new form of psychological horror initiated by Peeping Tom and Psycho in 1960 is that we are asked to identify with the monster's point of view and even to sympathise with the childhood traumas that produced his deranged behaviour. Both the protagonists of Peeping Tom and Jennifer's Body commit murders, acts reserved for the villains or the monsters. It can be said that the audience is encouraged to sympathise with them. Karen Kusama and Michael Powell both use point-of-view shots to force us to identify with the monster. The opening scene from Peeping Tom takes place from Mark's point of view. We open on an extreme close-up of Mark's eye before cutting to the camera lens to show how they are one and the same. Using this technique, we are also placed in the position of the voyeur, making us complicit in his crimes. Whilst we are forced into identification in Peeping Tom, we sympathise with the monster in Jennifer's Body. The camera follows the movement of her eyes as she looks at their books on Satan, realization hitting the audience and Jennifer at the same time. The band members are framed in low-angle shots, making them seem more threatening. The actual sacrifice, while horrifying, is not made disturbing by scenes of graphic violence. The terror is emphasized by the tonal dissonance between the band singing and Jennifer begging for her life. In her seminal 1975 essay, Laura Mulvey argues that women's bodies on screen are created for men by men for their pleasure. Women are simultaneously looked at and displayed, with their appearance coded for strong visual and erotic impact, so that they can be said to connote to-be-looked-atness. In this way, the perverse structures of seeing is an extension of the male gaze. The marketing campaign for Jennifer's Body played up the sex appeal of Megan Fox, completely misrepresenting the film to appeal to a male audience. Fox was already known for her hypersexualized roles such as Michaela Baines in Transformers, an image Kusama acknowledges and subverts in Jennifer's Body. Although the character is sexualized by nature, as she is a succubus, she is never objectified. The lake scene uses an overhead shot which cuts away before showing much of her naked body. Reminiscent of National Geographic documentaries on predators, the camera is objective. Megan Fox is not on display here. She stares down the camera, acknowledging the male gaze and rejecting it. Mark's killing, it can be argued, is a continuation of the male gaze. Mark's victims are by the nature of their professions to be looked at. His victims, a dancer, a prostitute, and a pornographic model, all perform for the pleasure of a male spectator. He attempts to lure them into the false belief that they are the monster. By controlling how she is perceived, he aims to achieve catharsis from the abuse he experienced from his father, the traumatic experience of being looked at. Both Peeping Tom and Jennifer's Body challenged the perverse structures of seeing to different degrees. Williams defined Peeping Tom as a more progressive horror film because it exposes the male aggressor's need to believe that his female victims are terrified by their own distorted image, revealing the process by which films themselves ask women to believe that they have asked for it. When confronted by the mirror snare, Helen closes her eyes, refusing to look, and therefore rejecting Mark's assertion that she is a monster and a victim. However, it could be argued that the only reason she survives the mirror trap is because she is portrayed as ignorant of sexual desire altogether. Therefore, Peeping Tom is progressive for exposing the perverse structures of seeing, and not because of its attitude towards women's sexuality. The horror genre, especially slashers, have a long history of punishing sexuality. Killing those who seek or engage in unauthorized sex amounts to the generic imperative of the slasher film. Unauthorized sex is often what makes women in horror films into victims and or monsters through the perverse structures of seeing, just as Linda Williams argues that women are punished for their active desiring looks.
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie. For instance, number 1, you can never have sex. No! Big no-no!
Jennifer's body subverts this sex equals death trope, as Jennifer's sexuality is literally her strength. The fact that she isn't a virgin is the reason she survives being sacrificed, and it's what gives her supernatural powers. Therefore, it can be argued that Peeping Tom is progressive for exposing the perverse structures of seeing, and not because of its attitude towards women's sexuality, unlike Jennifer's body. In conclusion, both films challenge the perverse structures of seeing to some extent. Peeping Tom for exposing Mark as the true monster instead of the women he tries to convince are monstrous. However, Jennifer's body presents the titular character as both a monster and a victim, to criticise how women are exploited and abused under the male gaze. Thus, Jennifer's body still relies on the perverse structures of seeing somewhat.